Hey y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Um, I'm excited to talk some improv and D&D with y'all. For those of you tuning in for the first time, I'm Matt, and I've been doing improv for quite a while now. I'd say almost a decade. Um, and I've been doing streaming of D&D and other TTRPGs. Big thanks to my friends at Level 1 Geek and at Let Us In. There's just been so many opportunities that have been given to me, and I'm eternally thankful. Now, today we're going to be focusing specifically um, on skills that you can use in your role playing that I've learned from playing and emceeing improv. Now, if you would like to follow along, I have. I'm going to swap over to our sheets now because I'll be taking some notes as we go. But I have included the link to this in my description, so if you want to, see the screen that I'm looking at right now actively, yeah, it's available to you. Or if you want to just, excuse me, oof. Or if you want to just have that for reference later, because there's definitely a test at the end. So, first things first, as a improv performer, growing up in Utah, I've mostly been doing short form stuff. So, like Whose Line Is It Anyway stuff, where typically the scenes are a bit shorter. They're more focused on a game that you play. Something like Questions Only, where you jump in and the rule is that you can only speak in questions. If you don't say a question, if you don't respond quickly enough, or if you repeat a question, then you end up getting buzzed out, and then someone else will replace you. It's stuff like that. Whereas long form, which has been growing in popularity lately, especially with media like Middleditch and Schwartz, and I think there have been quite a few videos that you could find on YouTube with UCB. I know Amy Poehler and like Don Cheadle. They were killing it with some performances of improv. So, whichever is your taste. I like both of them, though around here it's mostly short form. But at the moment, well, let's focus in. Some key ideas that you learn in improv is the ability to support each other. And one of the biggest things is the ability to share focus. Whenever you're doing a scene in improv, typically the scene is between two people. And these two players step out and they take on specific characters, of course. And typically there's a balance of who's active. Like if the two players are out front, then everyone on the sidelines, you're doing your best to stay attentive, so you can pay attention, so you can keep the focus on the scene. That's why, like, typically in those shows, the back line is usually fairly stationary, or they might even be off to the side, so that any little movement, because one small move can suddenly draw the attention's eye to you, even if you're on the back line, just like a nose pick or something. But the key here is that when there's a scene going on, you want to give the scene the amount of time it needs. Give the moment the amount of time it deserves. Because, a scene isn't very long. You don't have a ton of time to do what you need to do, to develop this scene. And as a result, if we do anything to take focus, we could end up undermining the scene. I'd specifically like to point to the idea of the walk-on. So, scene starts off 2 people. A lot of times, if you get an idea from the sidelines, because it's improv, you can step on and help out. Can step into an existing scene to help out. But the thing here is that because of the short life of a scene, typically 3 minutes, somewhere around 3 minutes, when you think about it like that, that's not a very long time. So if it's 3 minutes between 2 people, that's a very short amount of time allocated to this moment. If people just start jumping in, then you could very easily dilute it to the point of it being chaos and difficult to keep track of. So, my rules when it came to walking on was simply that, oh, hello! It's good to see you. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't miss your message for a long time. I appreciate you stopping in. At the moment, I'm talking a little bit about improv and then jumping into how this can apply to playing D&D, whether you're a player or a DM. Oh, no, not to worry at all. I just appreciate you showing up. Thank you so much. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it down, and I will answer them as best as I can. Yeah, right now we're talking about like an improv scene. 2 people start things off, and then from there, the idea of the walk-on is that you can step in basically whenever you want. But I want to really preach the idea of being deliberate and choosing when to walk on, because there's not, hey Jordan, hello, it's good to see you too. Yeah, it's a party, y'all. It's a party. But when it comes to the walk on, my rule is that you walk on when you walk on to do one of 2 things. First one is to end the scene. And typically, what happens here is maybe the improv scene has run its course, but no one has ended it yet. As an MC, typically the MC should end a scene, but if it's long form, it can be up to everyone else on the sides. And depending on everyone's familiarity with when to end a scene, there's a chance they're just leaving it going because they don't know when to end it. There's also a chance that they're waiting for a high point. They're waiting for a moment that releases the tension so that we can end it on a high note. So, with my first rule of walk-ons is you go in, you're not just in there to say the scene's over. Because if you wanted to do that, you just end the scene. You don't have to worry about walking into it. But you end it by giving them a injection of a high point. So if, let's say the scene is has reached the point of maybe the energy going down, then all we got to do is find some way to give them a burst of energy, whether it be making a joke that has to do with the scene, or if you can do some kind of a twist that has to do with what's gone on in the scene. Because that could be just enough of a reaction, just enough of a boost that someone else can come end it. Now, the second thing is if you can add information. Now, when I say add information, I don't mean taking over the scene. I mean that you, when you go in, maybe they've established a relationship where, let's say it's a romantic couple. Example, romantic couple. And let's say that between these two, the guy is sad that the gal is not focused on the moment. Let's say that. So if we're starting from this point, then we've got a game. And if we're playing up this moment, then simply put, if the gal's point of view is that she's not focused on the moment, then we can add in more information of things that will pull her focus from whatever's going on. And if you want to add information there, you could walk by as someone juggling or something. In which case, this is something else that would add while not taking over the scene, because they've already established this dynamic, and then it's just another element that lets the gal continue to play her thing of not being focused on the moment and being like, whoa, while the guy gets to be more and more sad that she's not focused. So the big thing is add, end scene, not trying to steal focus. So, we're going to translate this now into playing D&D. So, as far as players go, you can think of a scene in improv as being much like a scene in D&D. Every time you get to roleplay, that's basically a scene. Those scenes, if you've got everyone involved and you're discussing things, it can feel like a long time when everyone's involved, but when you have those little side moments, when it's not a matter of figuring out what to do, but when it's something that has to do with emotion, when it's something that has to do with maybe like an apology. I'm thinking of like a character moment rooted in emotion. Now, with this, one example that I could think of was from a game of Frost Geeks, which, if you haven't had the chance to check out, I was on that stream in that campaign, and absolutely delightful. Over on Level 1 Geek, on their Twitch, on their YouTube, definitely check it out. But the moment I'm referencing right now is simply when Quill, she is in that moment battling with the idea of being evil and also thinking about her past. Now, in that moment, because of things going on in the town, there were people being sacrificed to try to appease and protect the town from the winter, the cold. And, well, Quill, in her backstory, had a pretty close tie to being sacrificed herself. In which case, of course, she reacted pretty angrily at the idea of people sacrificing people for, like, the good of the whole. And so she was pretty fiery about it. Now, in this moment, Haskell, who before Quill had taken been pushed down the evil path by an unfortunate saving throw, he was the one who was more like chaotic, more morally ambiguous, but he has seen the roots of evil in Quill, and as a result, was talking with her about it seriously. Now, in that moment, it was one of those moments where these two characters, I mean, there are 4 of us, 4 players on the stream, 1 DM, of course, but those 2 players, those 2 characters, were talking seriously in that moment. And me, as Stew Drinker, I had decided, okay, in this moment, that's their moment. Sure, there's always like a fear when you're under pressure to have to jump in at every moment. Fear, pressure to jump in. Especially if you're on a stream or in a show of some sort, because that can make it feel like you have to perform at a certain level. And if you don't, then it's sort of like that anxious brain that wants to show that you deserve to be there. But from what I'd learned in improv, it's like when there's a moment going on, you give them time. Moment, give them time. Give them focus. In which case, in this game, we could see them having that heart-to-heart. And this wasn't necessarily a moment that would get closure immediately. We wouldn't see that for quite a few sessions, which is fantastic. Because then we get to sit with these emotions. We get to sit with the, how is this going to turn out question in our heads. So then me as Stew Drinker and Ian as Moon Eye, both of us knew this was a scene between Quill and Haskell. So we didn't jump in. We weren't needed. It was private. Until we reached the climax of the moment. Essentially, once they had reached the point, and every scene has this point, where when you're having that emotional moment, you might have 2 points of view that are butting heads. And in this case, it was Quill and her anger and her intent to be evil. And Haskell, who was seeing the evil in her and wanting her to rethink this, wanting her to be herself again. And essentially every line that they said back and forth, it's reinforcing their point of view. So it's like, hey, you should think about this. Hey, don't tell me what to do. And then it was like, you keep building and building. Now, we had realized definitely that as far as this struggle was concerned, neither side was going to 100% back down. They might be willing to compromise in the moment, but this was going to be a war. A war for Quill's soul. In which case, because of that, we had to keep in mind where we end this scene, where this moment should end. And typically, these moments end when we're able to reach some level of a high point. You'll see this a lot in shows where you have 2 people arguing. TV show reference. 2 people arguing back and forth. And in that case, when they're arguing back and forth, because it is TV or a movie, generally this continues to escalate where it's like, hey, then it's like, hey, and then you just keep going until maybe one person punches the other, or it reaches just such a boiling point, like punch, or it reaches such a boiling point that someone says something they didn't mean. And those would be the peak of the escalation. And once that happens, typically the person that was injured is going to not be able to respond because it's changed. The energy has changed now, whether by the punch or by the person saying the thing that really cut deep. And when that changes, it affects the person. This change affects the person. And when that happens, typically they leave. Typically that's the end of the scene. And in that moment, as far as Haskell and Quill were concerned, we had reached a boiling point. And then, well, at that point, there was a chance for a walk-on. And there was a chance for Ian and I to get involved. Moon Eye and Stew Drinker to get involved. And of course, we weren't getting involved to try to prolong what was going on. We weren't there to extend and be like, hey, we want to be involved in this moment too. No, that was Haskell and Quill's moment. We were jumping in so that we could in effect provide a shift, provide a way for the characters to transition out of that moment. Aside from them just walking away. And so, what we had done, not having heard the back and forth, and this is where we can play with a little bit of dramatic irony, not having heard the serious back and forth, then we were able to jump in with something funny. In this case, it was, hey! It's so good to see you, Dungeoneers Pack. Is this Josh? I'm sorry. It's, as far as the Discords are concerned, I always get all the names mixed up, but thank you so much for tuning in. Right now we're just talking about sharing focus, using improv ideas in with D&D. Specifically the idea of walking into a scene and knowing when not to. Fantastic. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or anything that involved with role-playing and improv and D&D, then feel free to drop one in the chat and I will answer them as quickly as I can. But yeah, in this scene, they had reached that boiling point, and so Stew Drinker and Moon Eye, we jump in and we're able to crack a quick joke and shift the energy from that serious moment between the two of them to just a little banter, a little back and forth about Quill's budding relationship. Because in spite of how serious the evil conversation was about her turning to the evil side, there was still the part of her that was still pretty innocent, which was, of course, when it came to romance and love. And so then we had the beautiful opportunity to jump in and tease her a little bit about the relationship, in which case she, though her alignment had shifted as far as character intentions go, her character still wanted love and would still be nervous about love, having not had those that experience before. So we could jump in as the older brothers razzing the younger sibling about about her new girlfriend. So, yeah, that's one example of sharing focus in a game. Something else I would like to mention is that if you are in a game and say there's a moment going on where a couple people have taken the lead. I think of it like, let's say we've got 4 people in the party, and let's say 2 people are actively trying to persuade someone. Well, if that's the case, and if, let's say, your character is, I'll say my character is not super persuasive. So, in that case, with those 2 characters actively trying to persuade, my character could be standing watch, or trying to keep an eye on the negotiation, or trying to keep an eye on any other activity nearby if anyone else is spying. In which case, say it. I think as far as any action is concerned, everything should be deliberate. Deliberate action. Because even if, I mean, we could just say, oh, my character is always alert, so it should be assumed as such. But it's a lot more clear for your DM and for your fellow players if you're willing to take the time to say specifically what you're doing. Like, let's say those 2 have gone forward and they are actively negotiating. And then my character, let's call him Brannon. I could easily say Brannon is gonna keep an eye out on the rest of the tavern. He is a little suspicious about the surroundings. He doesn't have his weapon not drawn, but hand on the hilt. And so then when it comes to you, it's less of a situation where you don't want to jump in because your low charisma could interfere, but more so that maybe your character is less interested in jumping in. So it's less of a player want, more of a character want. So then you can state, Brandon is going to keep an eye out at the ready. Give the little bit of description, because once you do that, it changes from passive to active. In which case, this gives the DM a little bit more fuel to play with. So, whenever your character is in a passive state, you can very easily change it so that you have more. So it feels like you have more to do in that moment. And I'm gonna shift over because every time, any choice you make, I want it to be deliberate. I want it because, I mean, whenever we're in a game, just as like whenever we're in an improv scene, we want, we're essentially living the exciting times, the exciting moments. There will be some downtime here and there, but usually we kind of fast forward through that. We might say, oh, I spend 5 days doing crafting. I'll spend this much time trying to study these books. But downtime, generally speaking, is fast forwarded through, while the moments we live at the table or on stage are the juicy ones. And we should treat them accordingly. So then when we are in those moments, we have active wants that we're pushing forward with. And as a DM, this is something that I like to do. It does take a little bit extra work as far as keeping track of everyone, but from the DM side, because I come from the background of emceeing a lot of shows in improv, I always want to be able to give each player the opportunity to shine, the opportunity to take focus as well as give focus. In which case, if we are in that same position where we have 4 players, 2 players in negotiation. Sorry, I'm gonna switch songs because I don't want to compete with lyrics. But let's say we do have 2 players in negotiation. And while they're negotiating, you could easily have player 1 do a persuasion roll, and then player 2 might be using the help action or aid action to give player 1 advantage. But then when that's going on, what are the other 2 players doing? If they're, let's say players 3 and 4 are keeping watch, in which case I would say you could even have them, like, let's say persuasion roll from 1 was a 18 for the higher one. Okay, that did not work as far as the formatting. Let's go player 1 persuasion of 18. Great. So they got a persuasion of 18, in which case, like, the other party, the NPC has a reaction, and the people around the NPC have a reaction too to what's being said. And if we want to make the players who are keeping watch so that they're still engaged, one thing I like to do when it comes to those reactions is to give the reactions to the players who are in the reactive state, in which case it would be players 3 and 4 right now, because they're the ones keeping watch. They're not actively doing something. I think of it kind of like sometimes if someone is active in like getting their point across, they might be so caught up in what they're saying and trying to be eloquent and trying to come off in just the right way, phrase everything in just the right way. They might be so focused on that it's hard to fully take in everything around them. And that makes sense. Maybe they're just focused on the one person and trying to sway the one person. And so then it would make sense that in that case, players 1 and 2 persuading. I would have players 3 and 4. They get to do the perception check or the insight roll, because then they don't have to worry about phrasing their words properly, right? They get the freedom to simply stand. They're vigilant, and if, let's say, the NPC has henchmen, and let's say that when players 1 and 2, when they're doing their persuading, let's say they say some element, some bit of information that incriminates the party. If that happens, oh, gonna swap. There we go. So, if they give a bit of information that incriminates the party, maybe the main NPC doesn't react because he doesn't want to give up his, doesn't want to give up a tell. Keeping the party there is to his benefit, even though they have said something wrong. I think of this as like maybe like a Godfather character, where what if the players are trying to persuade him, trying to get his help, and then they just mention that they took something. They took this goblet from like one of the locations, and this goblet is important. Now the NPC, if this is the Godfather figure who has a ton of experience and has dealt with these sorts of situations before, he might be able to keep his cool. And in which case, he might know that other people are arriving soon. Other people that are his allies are coming soon. So then he's going to keep talking and acting like everything is good so that backup can arrive, and then the party will be in really hot water. Now, though this Godfather NPC has a very good facade, there's a chance that one of his henchmen does not. But because players 1 and 2 are actively persuading the Godfather NPC, they wouldn't notice it. But you can give 3 and 4 the chance to do that role. Because if they are just keeping an eye out, and then suddenly 3 and 4 can notice when one of the henchmen reacts strongly to the mention of the special item. In which case now you can go to 3 and 4 and say, hey, you saw this. What do you do? Because then this little moment, their choice to be in the reactive state, you give them a benefit. Because when someone is keeping watch, reactive, when someone is keeping watch, making sure everything is A-okay, then you can reward them for it. Whereas the active players, they have focus in their persuasion, but that focus means some level of tunnel vision. But the big thing here is that you give them the chance, specifically the reactive players, a chance to be important in this without them necessarily having to be a part of the negotiation. So then we have every member feels important, and focus can be shared. So then in that moment, it's not just, oh, these two, their thing is to talk, and then everyone else disappears. I mean, in a way they do, but you get the chance to balance. You get the chance to go back and forth so that if the negotiation goes a little bit longer, you build tension. And the players that aren't active in it get to do something too. They get to make some decisions too. And I mean, they can operate as a team. And I think that's very important. Like whenever you can, as a DM, to be able to shine a light on each of your players, because sometimes that particular session has a focus on one or two players, one or two characters. But even with the focus, it doesn't mean that the other players aren't involved at all. So when it comes to these kinds of moments, something that I like to do is always checking in with each individual. Because at any moment, someone might have a brilliant idea and they'll say, hey, this is what I want to do. And then from there, we could very easily lose ourselves in it. We could very easily hear that first plan and then go along with it, but neglect everyone else. And we don't want to do that because when it comes to any party, I think of it like, I mean, of course it's a team, and the team can push forward together and do things so much more effectively together if they're given the chance. So, oftentimes, let's say player one says, I'm gonna go talk to the head honcho. In that moment, if I know that's gonna be a pretty involved moment, important moment, then I'll check in with everyone else too. Check in, and the way you do that is simple. You just say, so, while player one is standing up and heading towards head honcho, what is player two doing? And then you're attending to each of them. So then player two can consider, do I go with them? Do I want to keep an eye from afar? Am I gonna go talk to someone else in this moment? And just that one little question can make sure that every player feels involved. Like player two could just say, I'm going to keep an eye from afar, taking a small sip of my ale. And then you can move on to 3 and 4 and say, okay, player 1 is heading over there. Player 2 is keeping an eye out, having a drink, looking casual. What are you gonna do, player 3? And from there, you get to set the scene so that each of them get to have their moment in the spotlight and decide what they want to do, because every moment is important. And with every moment being important, we want to make sure that we don't miss anything. I approach, when it comes to every moment of roleplay, every scene, I think of it like, frankly, like a round of combat. Even though they're not necessarily fighting, every moment you have all your players, and so everyone should have the chance to decide on their course of action. Every player decides their course of action. And when they do that, you're able to keep everyone engaged. You're able to keep everyone involved. Additionally, when you do this, there are times, and this is why I switch from player to player, their focus, before the big thing happens. Because if player 1 starts talking to the head honcho and I'm already engaged and then I go to player 2, then that might that I'd say that kind of cuts off some potential for teamwork, because and this is why I say, like, here, timing, very important, because there's a chance that as player 1 starts heading towards the head honcho, that maybe player 4 wanted to help, but if I fast forward into him talking with the head honcho, then player 4 might feel a little cheated, because maybe they had a spell that could have given, what was it? I think it's enhance ability. I don't remember which one it was, but it gives advantage on charisma rolls. Just so I can make sure. Enhance ability, because I don't want to tell y'all the wrong thing, but enhance ability, 2nd level, and that is Eagle's Splendor. Eagle's Splendor. Advantage on charisma checks. There we go. Yeah, if you make sure to just check in a little bit so that before big things happen, then player 4 could give player 1 that Eagle Splendor that ends up making a big difference. Especially if you're playing like a prepared spellcaster. I mean, I've played a lot of prepared spellcasters, and there are many a time where it's almost like I feel like I have to be able to jump in. I have to be like so on edge to jump in to cast my spell, otherwise they're already doing their thing and then it's suspicious, right? I don't want to jump in and cast Eagle Splendor while he's already negotiating, because then everyone sees me casting a spell on him. And then they're like, hey, what are you doing? What is going on here? And then a fight ensues. I want to be able to do that in private before the big thing happens. But in order to do that, it's like, you've got to have just that little bit of a pause beforehand. And again, like, this is a bit more work as a DM, but I feel like it helps if you, as a DM, are able to take that little pause, so that, I mean, you know what moments are going to be big, you know what moments are going to be crazier, so you can jump in and see if the other players have anything that they would like to do to get ready first, to check in. Finally, I do want to add in one last thing as far as the idea of sharing focus and making deliberate choices, and overall pacing is concerned. And I'm going to make another little sheet for this part. Cool. For anyone who's tuned in a little bit later, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you want to follow along with my Google Sheet, I have it in the description. These are just the little notes that I like to go through while I'm talking about all this. But whenever I've done emceeing for short form improv, like Whose Line Is It Anyway, then I'm usually the one in charge of ending a scene. And there are certain games that I do where that becomes a lot more, it becomes a lot more rapid fire. And so as far as sharing focus is concerned, one thing, and this will help a lot if it feels like someone is not as engaged. Something you can do is, instead of having it be like, okay, I'm going to go to you, player 1, instead of it being player 1 gets 5 minutes and then player 2 gets 5 minutes and then player 3 gets 5 minutes, and same for player 4. You can do it. The game that I love in Improv. It's called Revolver. But what happens is you have either 3 or 4 distinct scenes, depending on how many players you have. The 2 people in the front are in the scene that's going on, and then you call out rotate. And when you do that, then we have the second scene, and you call out rotate. We go to the third scene. But the key principle I want to express here, and this does take a bit extra work because there have been times where I've lost track and it can be tough. But if you can pull this off, it can be very rewarding because it not only gives you a little bit of a chance to breathe in some ways, though it is taxing in other ways. But it also gives your players a chance to think too, inadvertently. So instead of going 5 minutes, conclude scene, 5 minutes, conclude scene, 5 minutes, conclude scene, 5 minutes, conclude scene, what I will do is, hello, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. As far as like going from scene to scene, instead of going from one scene to closure and then going to the next one, what I'd like to do, let's say player 1 goes to the head honcho. Player 2 wants to keep watch at the bar. Player 3 wants to stand outside to see if the henchmen outside are doing anything suspicious. And let's say that player 4 wants to talk with the henchmen inside. Now, in the style I mentioned before, it'd be 5, 5, 5, 5, and then it's done. But the revolver method would involve you starting with player 1, and we go, player 1 initiates conversation. You might have like 3 or 4 lines of dialogue in between. And then you go to player 2. Player 2, keeping watch at the bar. Maybe the bartender comes by and says, "Hey, your buddy affiliated with the murder gang?" I'm sorry, that's really on the nose, but I'm coming up with all this on the spot. But it's like you could have just a little bit of a moment here where maybe the bartender, having seen the murder gang in action, having seen the head honcho here before and what they deal with, the bartender comes up and starts talking to the person keeping watch. And the person keeping watch gets the chance to either brush this aside and continue to keep watch, or they get to learn more from the bartender. But it keeps them active. But after just a couple lines, 3 or 4, we go to player 3, who's outside, and maybe player 3 ends up talking with the henchman outside and finding out that the head honcho has been pretty sad lately. Why? It looks like his prized artifact, the goblet, was stolen. And then player 3 gets to process that. The fact that, wait a second, that goblet, the goblet that we took? And then when you get that you get to switch over to player 4, who's chatting on the side at a side table with one of the main henchmen. And this could be a situation where player 4 is trying to be nice, trying to pry some info, trying to distract, and the henchman, you get to decide how the henchman reacts, if the henchman is going to be cool with this or not, or if the henchman is going to be dismissive. I'm going to choose dismissive, in which case, when they're being dismissive, you might be able to make a little roll to see why this person is being dismissive, or maybe a way to convince this henchman to keep talking. Persuasion? Insight? And again, this is another 3 or 4 lines. But there, after we reach that point where maybe the persuasion goes well, and let's say, yeah, persuasion goes well, then 4 asks why he's feeling that way. What's got him so tense? Henchman sighs, takes a deep breath, and then now, all right, I'm gonna put that down here. So, and then this is one of the key elements, is that, and as far as pacing goes, this takes a little bit of time to get used to, so that you can find just the right moments to switch back and forth. But one of my favorite things is to give people mini cliffhangers. So if your henchman sighs, takes a deep breath, and is about to reveal something big, then you say, I'll come back to this in a second. We're back to player 1. Back to player 1 with the head honcho and the negotiation. Because this way, you have the opportunity to keep the energy going. You get to see the development as maybe player 1 with the head honcho gets somewhere, gets some level of cooperation with a good persuasion roll. Persuasion roll and good roleplay in general. And we have like a mini win here, a mini win so far, and then maybe player 2 finds out what... Oh, there we go. Maybe player 2 finds out what... Oh, sorry, I guess I reached the end of my playlist. I'm going to switch over to this one real quick. Maybe player 2 finds out what the head honcho does to people who steal from them. And so now, this player who was in the reactive state gets the chance to learn some valuable info. Without getting too graphic, you could have the bartender describe in detail so that player 2 realizes, oh no, that's who we're dealing with right now. Do we really want to deal with this person? Scary head honcho. And then player 3 at that point, once they found out that, wait a second, player 1 has the goblet in his bag. And this is the goblet of the head honcho. And it's like one of his most prized possessions. In which point, player 3 might wrap up the conversation with the henchman outside to try to get to the goblet in player one's bag because they don't want to be discovered at all. They don't want they don't want player one to accidentally like rummage through and show the head honcho this goblet. And then once they go in there, they spy everyone, and then you ask them, hey, how do you want to do this? Are you going to try to take the bag? Are you going to try to do a little sleight of hand here? Because it'd be suspicious if you're talking to someone and then some random person, as far as you know, comes up to the table and takes their bag, right? And then we have a potential like tense moment here. Let's say 3 does try to sleight of hand and grab the bag. I guess then it depends on how open it is, how easy it is. If it's a good sleight of hand roll, we might have a success. Grab the bag, get out of there, we're good. But if the sleight, and I'm going to use this one, if the sleight of hand is not good enough, then we can meld together 2 scenes. And whenever these things happen, it's one of my favorite things, because keeping track of 4 scenes at once is tough. It's tough. But eventually they kind of meld together because it's a team. So we'll get to that point. But sleight of hand's not good enough. We melded together the 2 scenes as the head honcho looks, sees 3 grab the bag, ask, hey, what are you doing? And then, again, cliffhanger. We switch over to 4. 4, chatting on the side, hears head honcho ask, hey, what are you doing? And then sees the henchman that they were talking to suddenly draw their weapon and start to stand. What does 4 do? And of course you're asking that player, hey, what do you do in this moment? And then 4 could decide to try to trip them and make it look like an accident. And in this case, I mean, I would allow a multitude of different roles, but I'm gonna give this a just a little I'll say athletics. I mean, typically when it comes to these more narrative focused moments, I'm inclined to give them whatever role is most beneficial to them, especially when I feel like this is going to go into a fight. Maybe I'll give this character, maybe they're particularly strong. I'll give them an athletics roll. Athletics to trip. Have them roll, and let's say they succeed. Then the henchman trips on their face, and the weapon, let's say it's a dagger, flies and lands, piercing the floor with a loud thud. With that, we've set up a lot of tension now, because now, with that fall, we have a lot of explaining to do, right? Because the henchman gets up, trips. Why did he trip? Did he notice the trip from player 4? And at this point, we have our melded together scene of 1 and 3. So I'm going to call this one, this is our new 1 now, where you have player 1 and 3 together. because they were asked, hey, what are you doing? And now, player one, who was the negotiator, gets to try to justify this away. Maybe they'll say, oh, this is my friend. I needed them to get the carriage. I left the carriage keys in my bag, though. And then you get to do a beautiful deception check. And then from there, like, what I want to teach here is that as things get more and more tense, as scenes start to meld together, it becomes quicker. Because once the person says, in frantic mode, says, I left the carriage keys in my bag, roll deception, then you get the number from them. Let's say it was it's like one of those tense numbers. Let's say it's like a 13, right? They rolled a 13. They're like, 13? Then you say, all right, so player two, and then you let them sit in that tension for a minute because they don't know. They don't know what's going on here. And also, like, in this case, while player one is doing this facade, you could also ask three, because we've melded these two scenes together. We want to make sure, and I nearly skipped over it myself. We want to make sure that three gets a chance to react too. If they want to support the lie, they could say something like, oh yeah, dumb me, I forgot to ask for the keys. And then I would be willing to give them advantage on that deception. But for the sake of drama, I'm going to keep that 13 for now. And then two, hearing about the danger. Hearing the thud of the dagger that's sticking straight out of the hardwood floor, and knowing how dangerous the head honcho and the murder gang are. What does player 2 do? In which case, player 2 is not involved in the main action. Right now, they've collected information. They've kept an eye on things. What could they do? What character are they? What kind of class are they? Maybe, let's say they're a magic user. They could very easily be keeping an eye and readying a spell. Readying maybe like a hypnotic pattern, or a fear, or a sleep spell of some sort. Readying spell as things get crazy. And while they're doing that, you could easily have them make another perception to see what the people outside are doing. Have they even noticed? Because in addition to potentially readying a spell to deal with what's going on here, they might see that the thud, the fall, has just caused the people outside to suddenly, like maybe they were on like a little smoke break. They put their cigarettes away and they're getting their weapons ready, in which case maybe player 2 could go and intercept them. Maybe 2 could go lock the door before they get inside. Now, in this case, again, as you see, it's like getting faster and faster. The moments are getting tenser and tenser. And instead of it being just like, oh, player 1 talks to head honcho for 5 minutes, player 2 keeping an eye out for 5 minutes, talking to the bartender, we're able to play, see, keep everyone engaged, and weave together all of these different lines based on what everyone's doing from moment to moment. And in this case, there's a lot of chaos, but it's chaos that keeps players 1 through 4 completely engaged. So, I've gone a little bit over my scheduled time. These are the things that I love to do. I mean, as a player, whether it's at the table with D&D or in scenes in improv, whether I'm playing or emceeing, this is my jam. So, I mean, at this point, I just want to say thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. You guys are amazing. I appreciate y'all listening to my rambling about improv and D&D stuff. This is just what I love. So, thank you for tuning in. That was my live stream. If you think of any questions or anything, any topics that you'd like me to address, whether they're in a live stream or a future video, please feel free to, drop it in the chat, leave a comment on the video or another video, or contact me on Discord or something. Because when it comes to talking about this stuff, I can talk forever, and I just want to be able to address the things that you want to hear about. So, at this moment, well, I'll be signing off. So, again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, as always, take care.